What would you do if your whole life turned out to be a lie? Could you handle it if the person you loved carried a secret so dark it could tear everything apart? This is a story inspired by real-life events, detailing how secrets and unresolved emotions led to a tragic and unforgettable event. Ryan Coleman and Tiana Harper seemed like the dream couple, the kind of pair everyone admires. They were from Birmingham, a city known for its southern charm and tight-knit communities, and they met during a volunteer drive at their local community center. But when Ryan discovered a secret from Tiana's past, one she had kept hidden, it set off a chain of events so unimaginable that even the most seasoned investigators were left stunned. Ryan was the solid, dependable type. At 34, he worked as a skilled electrician, well known for his work ethic and easygoing personality. With his strong build and calm demeanor, people respected him. Ryan had been raised in a traditional Southern family where hard work and loyalty were the backbone of everything. Friends loved to say Ryan was the guy who'd drop whatever he was doing to help you fix your leaky faucet or jumpstart your car. Tiana, at 30, was strikingly beautiful, with smooth caramel-toned skin, bright hazel eyes, and an effortless grace about her. She ran her own small but growing salon in downtown Birmingham, quickly gaining a reputation as a top hairstylist in the area. Tiana had a warmth about her that made people want to be around her. She had that rare ability to light up a room just by walking into it. When Ryan and Tiana first met, sparks flew instantly. Their romance moved fast, too fast for some, but they didn't care. Within months, Ryan was introducing Tiana to his parents and bragging to his friends about how lucky he was. She fit in seamlessly, charming his family, especially his mom, who was notoriously hard to please. By the end of the year, Ryan got down on one knee, and Tiana said yes with tears in her eyes. From the outside looking in, it seemed like they were living a fairy tale. But if you took a closer look, you'd notice cracks in the foundation, small things Ryan missed but would later wish he hadn't. Their wedding day was everything they'd hoped for. It took place in one of Birmingham's oldest churches, with over 150 guests in attendance. Tiana walked down the aisle in a stunning lace gown, and Ryan couldn't take his eyes off her. Standing at the altar, he thought he was the luckiest man alive. But even that day, little things felt off. Tiana seemed distracted, her smile fading when she thought no one was watching. When they exchanged vows, Ryan noticed her hands trembling slightly. He convinced himself it was just wedding day nerves, but the unease lingered in the back of his mind. After the wedding, they headed off to Miami for a week-long honeymoon. Ryan spared no expense, booking a luxury beachside resort to celebrate the start of their new life together. But even in paradise, he couldn't ignore the feeling that something was wrong. Tiana would sometimes grow quiet, staring off into the distance like she had the weight of the world on her shoulders. When Ryan asked her about it, she'd wave it off, saying, "I'm just tired, babe. Don't worry about me." Her smile was enough to put his mind at ease temporarily, but something deep down kept nagging at him. Once they returned to Birmingham, life settled into a routine. They moved into a small but cozy home on the outskirts of town, in a quiet neighborhood surrounded by trees and friendly neighbors. Ryan spent his weekends working on the house, while Tiana focused on expanding her business. From the outside, their life seemed perfect: a hard-working husband, a beautiful wife, and a future full of promise. But as the weeks turned into months, Ryan started noticing changes. Tiana became more secretive, locking her phone whenever he was near and disappearing for hours at a time without much explanation. When he asked where she'd been, her answers were vague, just running errands or meeting up with a friend. It didn't sit right with him, but he tried not to overthink it. Ryan trusted Tiana, or at least, he wanted to. What he didn't realize was that those small cracks in their marriage were about to turn into a full-blown disaster. And the secret Tiana was hiding? It wasn't just heartbreaking. It tore their world apart. Tiana started working late more often, saying her schedule was packed with new clients. But when Ryan decided to swing by her salon one evening to surprise her, he found it empty, the lights off and no sign of her anywhere. The excuses started piling up: meetings with friends Ryan had never heard of, whispered phone calls that stopped the second he walked into the room. Ryan's suspicions grew, but he didn't want to believe something was wrong. He loved Tiana with everything he had, and the idea of her keeping secrets from him felt like a knife twisting in his gut. He tried to convince himself he was overthinking it, that maybe this was just the stress of married life getting to him. Every marriage has its rough patches, doesn't it? But the distance between them only grew. The intimacy they once shared faded, and when it did happen, it felt hollow. Tiana would turn away afterward, avoiding Ryan's eyes. Sometimes, she seemed like she wanted to say something, her lips parting as if she were about to let a secret spill, but then she'd stop herself. Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that something big was hiding just under the surface, and one night, his suspicions got the best of him. He did something he never thought he'd do. He went through her things. While Tiana was out with her so-called friends, Ryan started searching. He combed through her drawers, her closet, her shelves, looking for anything that might explain the growing distance between them. At first, he found nothing, but then, tucked away in the back of the closet under a pile of old clothes, he found a small box. Inside, Ryan found documents that made his stomach drop. The first was a birth certificate for someone named Elijah Harper, a name he had never heard before. Confused, he kept digging and uncovered a stack of medical records, some dating back years. As he read through them, the reality of what he was holding began to sink in. The documents detailed Tiana's transition from male to female. Ryan sat there frozen, the papers shaking in his hands. It felt like the walls were closing in on him. The woman he had fallen in love with, the woman he had married, had hidden a part of her life so huge, so fundamental, that it made him question everything they had together. Anger, confusion, heartbreak. All of it hit Ryan at once. How could she keep something like this from him? How could she let him love her, marry her, without ever telling him the truth? The person he thought he knew better than anyone suddenly felt like a stranger. He sat there for hours, staring at the documents, his mind racing. Questions filled his head, but none of them had answers. By the time Tiana came home that night, the air in the house felt electric, like a storm about to break. Ryan was waiting for her in their bedroom, the box of documents laid out on the bed. When Tiana walked in and saw what was in front of her, the color drained from her face. She froze in the doorway, gripping the doorknob, so tight her knuckles turned white. "You lied to me," Ryan said quietly, his voice shaking with fury. He stood, holding the papers like they were evidence in a trial. "Who are you, Tiana? No, what are you?" Tiana's heart sank. She had always feared this day would come, the day when her past would come crashing down around her. But she never thought it would happen like this. She'd wanted to tell Ryan in her own time, in her own way, but fear had kept her silent for too long. "Ryan, please," she said softly, stepping toward him, her eyes welling with tears. "I was going to tell you. I swear I was. I didn't know how. I didn't want to lose you." She tried to reach for his hand, but he pulled back. "You didn't want to lose me?" Ryan's voice rose, trembling with rage. "You tricked me into marrying you. Do you even understand what you've done? I gave you everything. My love, my loyalty, my life. And this whole time you've been lying to me about who you really are." "Ryan, I love you," Tiana pleaded, her voice breaking. "This doesn't change who I am. It doesn't change who we are." Ryan's face twisted with anger. "It changes everything. You thought I wouldn't love you if I knew? Well, guess what? You thought right." The words hit Tiana like a punch to the gut. Her tears spilled over as she tried to explain, to make him understand. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I just wanted to be with you. You mean everything to me." But Ryan wasn't hearing her anymore. His mind was spiraling, consumed by betrayal, disgust, and confusion. The woman he had thought he'd spend his life with now felt like someone completely different. The argument only grew louder and more heated with each passing minute, anger pouring out from both of them. Ryan's emotions were boiling over, and the tension in the room was palpable. What neither of them realized was that this night, this fight, was the tipping point. What came next would shatter both their lives forever. Ryan's anger felt like it was burning through him, wild and unpredictable. Tiana stood frozen, caught between trying to explain and the sheer terror of what he might do next. She had never seen him like this, his face twisted with rage, his hands clenched into fists as he paced the room like a caged animal. "Ryan, please," she said, her voice trembling. "Just listen to me. We can work this out, I swear. I'll tell you everything. Anything you want to know. Just please don't do anything you'll regret." But her words couldn't reach him. It was as if a switch had flipped in his mind, and all he could see was the betrayal. The love he'd had for her, so deep and all-consuming, was buried now under the weight of her deception. In his eyes, everything they'd built together was a lie. "Calm down," Ryan snapped, turning on her with a fury that made her take a step back. "You've been lying to me since day one, and you expect me to just calm down?" His voice cracked, anger and heartbreak pouring out in equal measure. Tiana raised her hands instinctively, as though she could somehow protect herself from the storm raging inside him. She moved slowly toward the door, hoping she could make it out before things got worse. But Ryan was faster. Without a word, he spun around and stormed out of the room. In the garage, his chest heaving with every breath, Ryan's eyes darted around until they landed on a piece of equipment hanging from the rack. His hand closed around it tightly, his knuckles turning white as the cold metal pressed against his palm. Without hesitation, he marched back into the house, his anger now focused. Tiana's heart dropped as she saw the hammer in his hand. "Ryan, no. Please, don't do this," she screamed, her voice cracking as tears streamed down her face. But Ryan's anger reached a breaking point, clouding all reason. Letting out a furious roar, he acted in an unthinkable way, leaving Tiana severely injured. Tiana cried out, stepping back in pain and shock, but Ryan was too consumed by his emotions to stop. His overwhelming feelings of betrayal drove him to keep going, each action pushing him further past the point of no return. Tiana's screams echoed through the house, but Ryan couldn't hear them. His emotions spiraled out of control, clouding his judgment. When Ryan finally realized what he had done, the damage was irreversible, and Tiana was no longer moving. The home they had built together was now the site of an unthinkable tragedy. But the nightmare didn't end there. Breathing heavily, Ryan dragged Tiana's lifeless body into the bathroom. Still overwhelmed by anger and despair, Ryan went into the kitchen and grabbed a sharp object in the heat of the moment, setting off a series of tragic and irreversible events. By the time Ryan stopped, the scene was one of overwhelming devastation. The extent of what had happened in that bathroom would later leave investigators stunned and horrified. When police officers entered the home, the scene was beyond anything they could have imagined. The quiet suburban house, once a place of love and promise, had become the site of an unspeakable tragedy. In the middle of it all, Ryan sat motionless on the floor. His clothes and hands were stained, his face blank, and his eyes filled with a hollow disbelief, as though he couldn't comprehend what had just happened. With trembling hands, Ryan reached for his phone. His voice was flat, almost lifeless, as he spoke to the emergency operator. "Something terrible has happened," he said, barely above a whisper. The weight of his actions was beginning to settle in. By the time officers arrived, Ryan was sitting in silence, his gaze fixed on the tragic consequences of his actions. He didn't resist as they escorted him out of the house. Neighbors, gathered outside, watched in stunned silence as the once admired man was placed into the back of a patrol car. The story quickly spread, sending shockwaves through the Birmingham community. It wasn't just the tragic loss of life that drew attention. It was the revelation of Tiana's truth and the series of events that had led to this heartbreaking moment. At the station, Ryan sat alone in a stark interrogation room, his clothes replaced with a standard white jumpsuit. His head hung low as detectives tried to piece together what had pushed him to this point. "Ryan," one detective began gently, "what happened in that house tonight?" For a long moment, Ryan didn't answer. When he finally lifted his gaze, his voice was strained and uneven. "She lied to me," he said quietly. "I thought I knew her, but she wasn't who I thought she was." The detective leaned forward, his tone measured but firm. "And you thought that made this okay? You've destroyed everything, Ryan." Ryan didn't respond. Instead, he lowered his head again, his silence speaking volumes about the depth of his despair and confusion. It was clear something inside him had shattered, a fragile balance of emotions tipped into irreparable chaos. When the case went to trial, it drew national attention. The courtroom became a stage for a deeply emotional and polarizing discussion. Ryan's defense team argued that he had been overwhelmed by emotional distress, claiming that the revelation of Tiana's past had sent him into a state of uncontrollable anguish. The prosecution, however, presented Ryan as a man consumed by his own insecurities and anger, choosing to act out in the most violent and irreversible way possible. Tiana's life and character were placed under intense scrutiny, her story becoming a focal point of both sympathy and controversy. The most powerful moment of the trial came when Tiana's mother took the stand. Her voice trembled as she described how much Tiana had loved Ryan and how terrified she had been of sharing her full truth with him. She just wanted to be loved for who she was, her mother said, her eyes filled with tears. That's all she ever wanted. After weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury reached a decision. Ryan was held accountable for his actions and sentenced to life behind bars. He showed little emotion as the sentence was read, his future now confined to the walls of a prison. The aftermath of the case rippled far beyond the courtroom. Advocacy groups rallied around Tiana's story, using it to shine a light on the challenges faced by transgender individuals, particularly Black transgender women. A viral campaign, #JusticeForTiana, called for greater understanding, acceptance, and protection for the LGBTQ+ community. The neighborhood where Ryan and Tiana had lived was left deeply scarred by what had happened. The house, once a symbol of a promising future, stood as a haunting reminder of the tragedy. Neighbors spoke in hushed tones, grappling with the enormity of the loss and the lingering questions about how such a promising love story could end in devastation. Ryan's story became a grim cautionary tale, an example of what happens when secrets, fear, and unchecked emotions collide. Tiana's life, though tragically cut short, became a symbol of resilience and the ongoing fight for acceptance in a world that too often struggles to understand. Even now, her story resonates, sparking conversations about trust, identity, and the need for compassion. While no resolution can undo the pain of that day, Tiana's legacy continues to inspire efforts toward a more understanding and inclusive society.